Ethos.
If you could go back and have a conversation with your younger self, you get 20 minutes to sit down with whoever you were and share what you know now. If you could do that, what would you say? Now let's go back to when you were a teenager. What were your dreams? Have you realized them? Are some of them laid dormant? What happened? What did you put off for later? And now it's later. I have some good news. Creative dreams don't expire. There's an expression that wisdom comes with age, but that's only if we learn from our experiences and mistakes. Sometimes life presents an opportunity where you see yourself in a younger person. Maybe it's in a place you've been before. For me, that happened last week at Olivet Nazarene University, where I went to college. I was invited to speak to students about what I've experienced in my career. And as I was looking across the room at the faces of those young and hungry students, I saw my 18-year-old self. And now I want to share with you what I told them. I'm Paul Goldsmith, a creative coach and entrepreneur, and you're listening to the Creative Coach Cast. The job fields are constantly changing. So we know that the job that you have in 20 years probably doesn't exist right now, but the skill sets do. And so imagine yourself 20 years from now, looking back at today, what has to happen for you to feel successful? What are you waiting for? Let's get started on that path now. You don't have to wait for permission. You don't have to wait for a college degree. You don't have to wait for experience. It's a wonderful time to be in media because you have access to start a radio station this afternoon. Today, you could start your own podcast. You don't have to wait until it's good enough. I started a podcast at the beginning of this year, and I'm kicking myself. I had a friend that started a podcast in 2001, and I was a guest on his podcast. Nobody had heard of podcasting in 2001. That wasn't even a thing. And I was a guest. Well, he didn't continue it. I didn't continue it. And then I didn't get around to starting another one until 2021. But do you know how cool that would have been to be the first podcaster anybody had ever heard of? Doing it for 20 years, what amazing opportunities would have come. So all I can encourage you is don't wait 20 years to get started on whatever it is you want to do. The future is not fixed. And so you can start working on those skills and those crafts now. And it's a matter of being okay not being perfect. And I'm speaking from personal experience here. I was reluctant to start a podcast for many years because I worked with really amazing, successful broadcasters and I wasn't as good as them, right, in my head. And so I think we're always comparing ourselves to the ideal. So if you want a YouTube channel or you want to be a sportscaster, whatever the job it is that you envision you want to do, you kind of look at the most successful version of that. You want to be a singer, a performer. You look at Adele. You're like, well, I can never be like Adele, right? Well, of course not. She's Adele. But what you can be is the best version of yourself. And so we've got to stop comparing ourselves to the ideal. That's a nice dream to one day have a career as a professional singer. And it's definitely achievable if you've got some talent. But the key thing there is celebrate where you are now, and then you just set goals to move forward each and every year. But stop trying to compare yourself to the ideal, the perfection of having $1 million company or whatever the case may be. That's a great long-term goal. Now let's set goals that are more realistic. We can move forward week to week, month to month, year to year, and compare yourself year over year, not to the person that's 20 years down the road from you. Someone asked, what was my motivation for starting my first company? I was giving somebody else advice and I decided to take it myself. And sometimes that's the way, it's easier to give somebody else advice than to take it yourself, in my experience. I had a friend who was a very successful broadcaster. She quit her job to be a mom. She had 2 boys that were growing up and she was never there in the morning getting them off to school, and she wanted to be home with her kids. And so she was off, but really still had a desire to have a career. And so she was kind of torn and conflicted. I'm like, what are you waiting for? You don't have to go work at another radio station. You can start your own podcast right now. You've got a voice. You've got things to say. You can do that. And so we did a Kickstarter to pay for a new computer and microphone. But before we did the Kickstarter, we came up with a plan. We came up with a name for the podcast. We went to 99designs.com. And I think she paid $100 for multiple designers to create logos, and then she picked the one she liked the best. So we had a logo, we created a website, and then she started producing these. Before we announced the Kickstarter, we got most of the work done. We announced the Kickstarter. It was successful. And then the day the Kickstarter ended, she launched the podcast. So it was immediate payoff for all the people that gave money. It was a daily podcast in that case. And by the end of the month, we had a radio station call and say, hey, could we put clips of that podcast on our radio station? And then by the end of the year, more radio stations wanted involved. And suddenly she was back on the radio on her own terms and she had her own business. And I saw that and I said, wait a second. I never envisioned that. I was just trying to encourage my friend. If she can do this, she didn't believe she could, and she did. Maybe I could do this. And so I offered my consulting services, and I got to the point where I had enough clients that I went to my employer. I don't need to be an employee. I can be a contractor. And so when they said, okay, I had enough business that I was able to go full time with my own company. I sort of created that opportunity out of nowhere, and it worked. Time for another question. How do you cut through the clutter and create something that somebody else wants to listen to? I think you really have to slow down and be intentional about what it is you're creating, because we consume so much content. So for you to cut through, to get somebody to actually pay attention to what you have to say, you better have some meaning. And so the way we do that is by adding context, to telling a story. And so for you to cut through, to actually get my attention, you've got to say something to pique my interest. That's why the feeling is so important. Don't waste people's time. The vast majority of podcasts are unlistenable. Got to get to the point up front and then editing. And so that is the magic, like cut out the boring parts. So I think that's the key of podcasting. Whatever you're going to do in media, I think it boils down to the 3 Ps: people, process, and performance. There's an old African proverb, you've probably heard it, but if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So whatever you're going to do in media, so you're starting a podcast, you're starting a radio show, see the faces of the people you're talking to. What do they care about? And what's going to make them feel something? What can I add value to their life? If you don't know, you're going to be aimless. You don't have to do it all alone. Who are the people that can help you accomplish these goals? Who are the people that are maybe a couple years ahead of me that I could go learn from? People love to help others that they were there themselves not that long ago, and care about people. I think that's the other thing where we get really passionate about having a radio show or a YouTube channel, but you can't forget it's all about connecting with people. It's not about having the most watched YouTube channel or the most watched TV show or listened to podcast. It really is, do you actually care about the people you're talking to and the people you're working with? Number 2, you got to have a process for whatever you're doing. You can study the process of people that have been successful in that field and ask them what's their process. You really can't do all the things. So you don't have to be on every social channel. You don't have to have a TikTok, a YouTube channel, a podcast. What are you naturally good at? What do you want to do? Maybe you're a really good writer. Start a blog. Newsletters are profitable right now. There's a lot of people making a lot of money just writing long-form blogs. So what are you naturally gifted at? And what can you lean into and continue to improve your performance? So the sooner you figure that out and really strive for excellence in those few things, you want to get better at something, you've got to put in the time. So if you want to get better at podcasts, start a podcast today. And a year from now, you're going to be better if you continue to work at your craft every single day and every single week, and you're studying others in that craft. So what's your system for doing that? You need a system for accomplishing your goals. So whatever it is, be a better podcaster, be a better broadcaster. Start now. You don't have to wait for somebody to assign it in a class. If you just kind of wait for the perfect conditions, you're never going to get started. It really is. Come up with a process, focus on the things that you really want to get good at, and just do those things. Don't try to do everything. So then it comes to performance, because you're starting your shows this week. Okay, this is a good opportunity to fail fast. Be okay with not being perfect. Record a break, listen back to it and say, okay, how can I make that tighter? How can I make that more compelling? So you listen back to yourself. Really, those 3 things I think are most essential. Really care about the people that you're talking to, that you're creating content for. Be clear about who they are. Ask who, not how. Who can help me in this pursuit? Who can I learn from? And then create a process to get better at whatever it is you want to get better. Just don't do all the things. Focus in on the essential things, the 80-20 principle. 80% of the results come from 20% of the effort. So what can I focus on? That's why I like podcasting. Start with the audio, get better at storytelling before you add the element of video. And it'll only make you a better YouTuber if you decide to create a YouTube channel. And on the performance, Man, that's key. So I think get in your reps now, start now and don't wait. And so if you're going to create content, spend more time creating and less time consuming. Have you ever been somewhere when your phone dies and you look around and everybody is like looking at their phones and you're like, what are these zombies? Everybody wake up. And you're like, oh, wait, that's me when my phone isn't dead. There's a moment of clarity there. And so when you're telling stories, it really is like what actually matters to people. There's these things that are manufactured on the internet that become memes or whatever, National Hot Dog Day. That doesn't move you. And maybe you're just taking that class, you don't actually want to work in media. It's going to help you in whatever career you do. If you want to, you end up being a teacher, you got to tell stories that don't bore your students. Or you want to be a plumber, who knows? Whatever it is you want to do, you've got to be able to differentiate yourself from your competition. And that is the power of story. So study great storytellers and just learn to connect with people on what matters to them. You can do anything you want to do if you commit to it and just keep at it because the technology is available to you today. You don't have to wait for somebody to hire you at a radio station to record a radio show, a podcast, a YouTube video. All of those things are available to you now. So if you haven't already started those things, do it today. And then just, you can make it private for now. Then you want to get feedback and just don't wait. Get started now. If you have any thoughts or questions about today's show, I would love to hear from you. Reach out on Twitter or Instagram. I'm at Paul J. Goldsmith, or you can send me a text to 559-574-3210. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.